She was not free. Her world had been stolen from her long ago, and now she lived in a place where the air smelled of stone and dust. The ones who ruled over her never called her by her name. They called her the bed warmer, a cruel title for a cruel fate. Her task was not work of choice, not service with honor, but slavery, a slavery of body and soul. Every night she was taken to warm the cold-blooded bodies of her captors. Her skin, her breath, her warmth was used as if she was nothing more than a blanket. And when the morning came, she was dragged back into her narrow chamber with no window, no light, only walls that listened to her silent tears. She had once belonged to a proud alien race. Her people had lived under suns of red and gold, singing songs of freedom, building cities that touched the skies. But all that was gone now, shattered when the invaders came. The invaders took the strong as workers, the weak as tools, and those who survived were broken into roles that had no dignity. She had been young when captured, too young to know the full joy of her people. And now she had grown older inside chains, her eyes no longer shining with hope, but dull with sorrow. In that dark room, she had learned silence. Speaking only brought punishment, questions only brought pain. So she whispered her words inside her mind, keeping them safe from the ears of her masters. Sometimes she remembered her real name, a soft name, a name her mother had given her. But even that was fading, erased by years of being called bed warmer. The title pressed heavy on her chest, until she almost began to believe she was nothing else. One night, as she lay curled in the corner of her cold chamber, she heard something strange. It was not the usual sound of heavy boots that dragged her away. It was sharper, stronger, as if carried with purpose. The voices of the guards trembled in a way she had never heard before. They spoke fast, their words spilling like water from a broken jug. And in their words, one sound repeated again and again, human. Her ears twitched, her heart beat faster. She did not know what it meant, but she could sense the fear in their tone. Who was this human? And why did it frighten those who had never known fear before? The door to her chamber groaned as it opened. Light spilled inside, not the soft light of the sun she longed for, but the sharp glow of lamps carried by guards. They were whispering, their faces pale, their hands shaking as they pushed her back against the wall. For the first time she saw them afraid, and their fear made her wonder. She heard it again, closer now, boots striking the floor with power. This was no shuffling step of a guard, no careless march of a master. This was someone who walked with control, someone who owned the ground beneath their feet. When he appeared, she thought she was dreaming. The figure was taller than she expected, wrapped in armor that gleamed even in the dim light. His face was strange yet strong, with eyes that seemed to cut through the walls and into her soul. He was not like the others. His skin was different, his form solid, his presence commanding. The guards stepped back, and for once their hands shook more than hers. They muttered again, human, like a curse, like a warning, like a truth they could not deny. The human's gaze fell on her. He did not look at her the way her masters did, not with hunger, not with cruelty. His eyes were filled with something she had almost forgotten existed. Pity. In that moment she froze, unsure if this was another trick, another cruel game. But the human stepped closer, his voice low, calm, and unlike the harsh tones of her captors. You, he said, his words slow and heavy with meaning. Do you want to be free? She could not answer, her throat dry, her body trembling. Freedom was a dream she no longer dared to believe. But in his eyes she saw the spark of truth, and in his voice the promise of something greater than chains. The guards tried to protest, their words loud and broken. But the human's hand moved to the weapon at his side, and silence followed. No one dared to step closer, no one dared to challenge him. For the first time, the power in the room shifted. And in that moment, as she looked at the stranger who called himself human, a new thought entered her heart, fragile but real. Maybe this was not the end of her story. Maybe this was the beginning of something she had long forgotten. Hope. The human stood in the doorway like a storm breaking into a silent valley. His armor caught the dim light, his presence filling the chamber with power that had been absent for years. The guards who once dragged her without fear now hesitated, their eyes wide, their voices broken. She could see it clearly. Their fear was not for her, but for him, this outsider who dared to enter their stronghold. The alien girl, still crouched in the corner, tried to make sense of what was happening. Her body trembled, not from cold this time, but from the strange energy that filled the air. The human's gaze remained locked on her, steady and firm. He did not see her as an object, not as a tool, not as bed warmer, but as a being who had suffered. It was the first time in countless nights that someone looked at her as if she mattered. One of the guards, braver or perhaps more foolish than the rest, stepped forward. His voice cracked as he spoke, "She belongs to us." But the human did not flinch, did not blink. Instead, he placed his hand on the weapon at his side, a weapon unlike anything the aliens carried. Its metal gleamed, humming softly with restrained power. The human's reply was calm yet sharp. "Not anymore." The word struck like thunder. The chamber seemed to shiver, the air itself heavy with the weight of defiance. The guards exchanged nervous glances, torn between duty and fear. But the human did not wait for them to decide. He stepped closer to the girl, his movements steady, his eyes softening as he crouched before her. "You are not a slave," he whispered, his voice carrying warmth she had not felt in years. "Stand with me." Her legs were weak, her heart unsure. She had been taught obedience, silence, submission. Freedom was a word she barely remembered, a dream too fragile to touch. And yet, as she looked into his eyes, she felt something stir within her. It was small, like the first spark of fire in endless night, but it was there. A part of her wanted to believe him, to trust this stranger who risked everything to reach her. But the guards were not ready to surrender. One raised his weapon, a jagged blade that glowed with venomous energy. The human's response was instant, his weapon flashing faster than sight. A burst of light split the air, and the guard's blade shattered, pieces scattering across the floor. The others froze, their courage vanishing as quickly as it came. They stepped back, their hands trembling, their voices silenced by the truth before them. This human was not ordinary. He was a warrior who carried not only strength, but conviction. He turned to the girl again, extending his hand. Her breath caught, her body still hesitant. The choice was hers, a choice she had not been allowed to make in so long. The human's hand did not push, did not force. It waited, steady and patient. Her fingers trembled as they rose. The chains in her heart screamed with fear, but the small flame inside her pushed forward. At last, her hand touched his. It was warm, not with the forced heat she had been made to give, but with life, with kindness, with strength. A shiver ran through her as he pulled her gently to her feet. Her knees almost gave way, but his grip held her steady. Behind them, the guards muttered, their voices fading, their bodies backing away. None dared to challenge him again. The human guided her toward the doorway, each step echoing like a drumbeat of rebellion. For the first time in years, she crossed the threshold not as a slave dragged by force, but as someone being led toward freedom. The hall beyond was long and shadowed, filled with echoes of the life she had endured. She could hear other voices in the distance, cries of despair, whispers of pain. Her heart twisted. She was not the only one. But the human's eyes met hers again, steady and determined. "There is a way out," he promised, "but you must trust me." She nodded, her voice trapped, but her spirit trembling with the possibility of escape. As they moved deeper into the corridors, the alarms began to sound. A shrill cry filled the air, warning of intrusion, warning of rebellion. The walls pulsed with red light, shadows stretching like claws across their path. Her fear threatened to rise again, the old chains whispering that freedom was impossible. But then she felt his hand tighten around hers, grounding her, reminding her that she was no longer alone. The human moved with purpose, each step careful yet firm. He seemed to know the way, his eyes scanning corners, his weapon ready. She stumbled to keep up, her breath ragged, but he never let go, never slowed. Every turn brought danger, every shadow hid threat. But she followed, because for the first time she had something worth following, hope. And as the alarms grew louder, as the sound of approaching guards filled the air, one thought burned in her mind, clear and strong. The nightmare was breaking. Her chains were not eternal, because one human had chosen to defy the darkness. The alarms screamed like the cries of a dying world. Red lights flashed across the walls, painting every shadow in blood. The girl's heart pounded as she stumbled beside the human, her body weak from years of chains. But his grip held her steady, his presence a shield against the storm that gathered around them. The corridors twisted like a maze, each corner filled with danger. From the distance came the sound of boots pounding against metal floors, the roar of voices shouting orders. "They are coming," she whispered inside her mind, though no words left her lips. Yet the human did not slow, his steps were certain, as if he had walked this path 100 times before. His weapon gleamed in the flashing light, ready to strike at anything that blocked their way. When the first wave of guards appeared, the human did not hesitate. Blades and rifles raised, the aliens surged forward, their faces twisted with fury. The girl froze, her body shrinking against the wall, but the human stepped in front of her. A blast erupted from his weapon, a streak of light cutting through the air. The lead guard fell, his armor shattered, his body crumpling with a sound that echoed through the hall. The others staggered back, fear crawling into their eyes. The human's voice rang out, deep and commanding, "Stand down or fall." For a moment, the guards hesitated, but pride pushed them forward. And so the hall became fire. The human moved like a storm unleashed. Every strike was precise, every blast deliberate. The aliens fought with rage, but rage could not pierce his control. He cut through their line with strength and skill that made her breath catch in awe. For so long she had only seen humans whispered of, cursed by her masters. But now she saw with her own eyes why even the strongest feared them. When silence finally fell, the floor was littered with broken weapons. The surviving guards fled into the shadows, their courage shattered. The girl pressed her back against the wall, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. Her body trembled, not only from fear, but from the sight of freedom carved by fire and defiance. The human turned to her, his eyes softer than his weapon. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her legs threatened to give way. He nodded, guiding her forward once again. They moved deeper, past corridors that smelled of smoke and iron, past chambers where other captives huddled in silence. Her heart twisted as she saw them, their eyes hollow, their bodies broken like hers had been. She wanted to cry out, to reach for them, but the human's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "We cannot save them all now," he said quietly, "but we will return." His words were steady, a promise not thrown lightly. And though her chest ached with guilt, she believed him. The path led to a great gate, tall and unyielding, locked with chains of glowing energy. It pulsed like a living thing, each surge a barrier stronger than steel. The girl's heart sank. "We cannot pass," she thought, despair threatening to return. But the human only smiled faintly, his hands moving across the device at his wrist. Symbols flickered, lights shifted, his technology unlike anything she had seen before. The gate shuddered, sparks leaping across its frame. With a roar it broke, collapsing into darkness. Beyond lay open air. For the first time in years she felt the wind. Cold, sharp, but real, carrying scents of earth and sky. Her chest tightened, her eyes burned as tears she had long forgotten rose again. She stepped forward, her feet touching ground not bound by chains. The human stood beside her, watching the horizon, his eyes scanning the stars. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice low but certain. "Your captors will not stop, they will hunt us. But we will fight." The night sky stretched wide above them, filled with stars that shimmered like scattered diamonds. For her it was more than beauty, it was freedom, it was proof that chains could be broken. She looked at the human, this stranger who had risked everything for her. Her voice trembled as she finally spoke, a sound dry and fragile from years of silence. "Why?" she asked, her words barely more than a whisper. "Why save me?" The human's eyes softened, his answer simple yet heavy with truth. "Because no one deserves to live as you have lived. Because you are more than what they made you." She stared at him, her heart unsteady, her spirit caught between disbelief and longing. In his words, she felt something awaken, something her masters had tried to bury forever. Hope. It flickered inside her like a fragile flame, but it was alive. And as they stepped into the wilderness together, with alarms still echoing in the distance, she knew her story was no longer only about chains. It was about escape, about defiance, about the beginning of a new war. The night air carried freedom, but it also carried danger. The girl breathed deeply, tasting the world outside for the first time in years. The wind was cold, sharper than she remembered, brushing her skin like 1,000 needles. But even that sting felt like life, a reminder that she was no longer in the cage. The human stood beside her, his armor scarred from battle, his weapon still warm with power. He scanned the horizon, his eyes sharp and steady. "Move quickly," he said, his voice low but firm. "They will come." And she believed him, for behind them the fortress still screamed with alarms. The shadows of pursuit were already rising. They ran into the wilderness, her legs weak but driven by something new. Each step was heavy, but the human never let her fall. His hand guided her, his pace slowed just enough for her to keep up. Above them the stars stretched endless, but behind them fire and voices grew louder. The hunt had begun. The ground was rough, scattered with jagged stone and tangled roots. She stumbled more than once, but he pulled her forward each time. "You must keep going," he told her, his tone not harsh but unyielding. Her body ached, her lungs burned, but inside her chest the flame of hope pushed her forward. She could not stop now, not when the chains had already been broken. From the darkness came the sound of engines. Strange ships cut through the sky, their searchlights slicing across the land. The human pulled her down into the cover of rocks, shielding her with his body. She trembled as the lights swept past, the sound of metal wings echoing across the valley. "They will not give up," he whispered, "but neither will I." She looked at him, her voice shaky but real. "You could have left me," she said. "Why risk so much for me?" The human's eyes met hers, steady as stone. "Because I could not stand by," he answered. "Because one life matters, even when the universe says it does not." His words struck deep, stirring something long buried within her heart. But their pause did not last. The hunters were closing in, their lights weaving closer, their voices sharp and cruel in the night air. The human rose, pulling her up with him. "We head for the cliffs," he said, pointing to the jagged edge in the distance. "There is a path there, hidden from their sight." Her eyes widened at the thought of climbing such ground, her body still frail from years of captivity. But his confidence carried her, and so she followed. The climb was hard, every step a battle against the stone. Her hands bled as they scraped against the rock. Her muscles screamed with pain. The human climbed ahead, reaching back often to pull her higher. "Do not look down," he told her. "Look only at where we are going." And so she forced her eyes upward, refusing to surrender to the fear that pulled at her mind. The hunters reached the base of the cliffs, their voices rising in anger. Blades of light cut through the darkness, searching. The girl pressed close to the rock, her breath caught in her chest. But the human kept moving, his hand strong as he pulled her higher and higher. Above them the wind howled, below them danger waited. Each step was survival, each moment a choice to keep fighting. At last they reached a ledge, narrow but hidden by jagged stone. The human guided her onto it, shielding her body with his own as the hunters searched below. The light swept across the cliffs, but did not find them. For a moment, silence wrapped around them like a fragile shield. The girl leaned against the stone, her chest heaving, her body weak but her spirit alive. The human crouched beside her, scanning the darkness. "They will not stop," he said, "but neither will I." His words carried weight, not just promise but destiny. She looked at him, her heart trembling, her voice small. "What will happen to me?" she asked. His reply was steady, his eyes filled with fire. "You will live, you will be free, and they will never own you again." But before she could answer, the night was shattered by a new sound. A roar of engines, louder and heavier than the search ships. From beyond the horizon came the glow of fire, a massive vessel rising like a beast of war. The ground trembled beneath them, the cliffs shaking as if the earth itself feared what was coming. The human's eyes narrowed, his weapon humming with power as he rose to his feet. The girl's heart raced, her body pressed against the stone as she whispered a single thought. The hunt was no longer just for her. It was for him too. The night trembled with the roar of engines. The girl clung to the stone as the massive warship rose above the cliffs, its shadow swallowing the stars. Its hull glowed with lines of fire, weapons pulsing with energy strong enough to turn the valley below into ash. The fortress had called for reinforcements, and now the hunters were no longer alone. The human stood tall on the ledge, his eyes locked on the beast of metal that filled the sky. His weapon hummed in his grip, its light sharp and alive. Beside him, the girl trembled, her voice caught in her throat. "They will destroy us," she whispered, her heart sinking under the weight of the sight. But the human did not flinch, his voice steady. "Not if we move." He pulled her away from the ledge, guiding her along the narrow path that wound deeper into the cliffs. Rocks crumbled under their steps, the air sharp with dust and wind. Behind them, searchlights from the warship swept across the valley, painting the land in pale fire. The cries of the hunters grew louder as they followed, their anger rising with every echo. The girl stumbled, her body weary, but the human never let go of her hand, never let her fall. They reached a hollow carved into the cliffs, hidden from the open sky. Inside it was dark and damp, the stone walls whispering with old echoes. The human led her to the deepest corner, pressing a device against the wall. Symbols glowed, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a narrow tunnel beyond. The girl stared in shock, her voice faint. "You knew this was here." The human nodded, his gaze sharp. "I came prepared." They slipped inside, the tunnel closing behind them, sealing them away from the searchlights above. The path was narrow, the ceiling low, forcing her to crouch as they moved. Her hands brushed against the stone, cold and rough, but safer than the open sky. The human's steps were sure, his presence steady as he guided her through the darkness. For a while, the only sound was their breath, the beating of their hearts, and the distant rumble of the warship. At last the tunnel opened into a cavern, wide and hidden. In the center lay something that took her breath away. A craft, smaller than the warship but alive with power, its surface sleek, its lights dim and waiting. The human placed his hand on its side, the panels glowing as if the machine recognized him. "This is how we leave," he said, his voice carrying both relief and urgency. The girl stepped closer, awe shining in her tired eyes. She had dreamed of the stars as a child, dreamed of flight and freedom. Now the dream stood before her, real and waiting. Her hand brushed the surface, smooth and warm. "Will it carry us far?" she asked softly. The human met her gaze, his voice certain. "Far enough to give us a chance." But before they could board, the cavern shook with violent force. Rocks rained down, dust filled the air, and the roar of engines thundered above. The warship had found them, its scanners tearing through the stone, its weapons charging with deadly light. The human cursed under his breath, his eyes flashing with fire. "They are faster than I hoped," he growled, pulling her toward the craft. She stumbled inside, her heart pounding as the walls of the cavern trembled like they would collapse. The human moved with speed, his hands flying across the controls. The craft hummed to life, its lights brightening, its engines awakening with a roar that shook her bones. The ground cracked, the ceiling split, and a blinding beam of energy cut through the stone above. The girl screamed, covering her ears as the cavern filled with thunder. The warship was tearing the mountain apart to reach them. The human gritted his teeth, forcing the craft upward. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The ship rose, breaking free of the collapsing cavern. Stone shattered and fell, fire rained from above, but the craft pushed forward, climbing into the night sky. The girl clung to her seat, her eyes wide as the stars opened around them once more. But the warship was waiting, its weapons aimed, its presence like a predator ready to strike. The human's hands tightened on the controls, his eyes sharp with determination. The hunt had left the ground, and now it raged among the stars. The stars stretched wide, endless and cold. The girl pressed herself against the seat, her body trembling as the small craft soared into the sky. For the first time since her capture, she was flying free, no chains, no walls, only the vast ocean of space before her. But freedom was fragile, for the warship loomed above like a mountain of fire, its weapons blazing to life. The human's hands gripped the controls, his face calm but focused. Every motion was precise, his eyes sharp as the first beams of energy streaked past them. The small craft twisted, diving through the black void, engines screaming against the strain. Explosions lit the darkness, turning the stars into bursts of fire. The girl gasped, clutching the edges of her seat. "We cannot fight that." The human's jaw tightened, his voice steady. We do not fight it head-on, we outthink it. The warship thundered forward, its cannons releasing storms of light. The small craft darted between them, weaving like a shadow through chaos. Each strike shook the ship, each blast a reminder of how small they were against the giant. But the human never wavered, his movement smooth, his control unshaken. He pressed a series of switches, and panels inside the craft flickered to life. Hold tight, he warned, his voice firm. Suddenly the ship rolled, spinning downward in a spiral. The girl cried out, her vision swimming, the stars blurring into streaks. But just as the warship's cannons fired again, their blast ripped through empty space, missing by inches. The human pulled hard, the craft leveling, sliding under the belly of the giant vessel. Lights flashed along its surface, weapons trying to lock on. But the small ship moved too fast. The girl stared in awe, fear mixing with wonder. How can you fly like this? His answer was simple, sharp, because I must. The warship shifted, its engines roaring. Dozens of smaller hunter ships spilled out from its sides, their wings sharp, their engines glowing red. The hunt had multiplied, the sky filling with predators. The girl's heart sank, her voice trembling. There are too many. The human's gaze hardened. Numbers do not win battles, resolve does. The hunters swarmed, beams of fire slicing across the void. The human's ship twisted, dived, climbed, the engines roaring like a beast refusing to die. He fired back, each shot clean and exact, tearing through the wings of the hunters, sending them spinning into the dark. One exploded beside them, the blast rocking their craft, sparks bursting across the controls. The girl screamed, but the human steadied the ship, his voice calm. We are still here. The battle raged, light and fire painting the night. The warship's cannons fired again, a massive beam cutting across the stars. The human swerved hard, the ship rolling through the blast, the heat searing past their hull. The girl clutched the seat, her body shaking. We cannot keep this up. The human's eyes narrowed, sweat on his brow, his voice a promise. We do not need to, only long enough to strike. His hands flew over the controls, guiding the craft closer to the warship. The girl's eyes widened, terror filling her. Closer, she gasped. But it will destroy us. The human shook his head, his voice calm but fierce. Its strength is also its weakness. The ship roared forward, slipping between the hunters, weaving through fire and chaos. The warship loomed larger, its hull glowing with energy, its weapons turning toward them. The girl's breath caught, her heart pounding. What are you doing? She whispered. The human's reply was steady, unshaken, ending this chase. The small craft shot forward, closing the gap as the warship's cannons powered up. The hunters swirled around them, but the human's fire cut them down, one after another. The girl's eyes filled with fear and hope all at once, her voice trembling. Will we survive? The human's gaze stayed locked on the giant before them, his words sharp as steel. We will, or we will make sure they never forget us. The warship's weapons unleashed, beams of fire racing toward them. The small craft dove, engines screaming as the void filled with light. The girl's scream echoed through the cockpit, her hand gripping his arm. The ship shook, alarms blaring, the controls flashing red. The human gritted his teeth, forcing the craft forward, through fire, through chaos, through death itself. The warship loomed close, its surface rushing toward them, glowing like the heart of a star. And as the small craft hurtled straight toward the enemy giant, the girl's heart stopped, her voice breaking into a single whisper. Please, let this not be the end. The warship filled the void, its hull glowing like a living sun. The small craft hurtled straight toward it, fire trailing in its wake, alarms screaming inside the cockpit. The girl clutched the human's arm, her voice caught between fear and belief. The giant's weapons blazed, beams of fire racing toward them, but still he did not turn away. At the last moment, the craft spun, sliding along the warship's surface, sparks flying as metal scraped against metal. The human's hands danced across the controls, his eyes sharp, his jaw set with iron resolve. He was not fleeing, he was hunting. Panels on the ship's wings opened, releasing bursts of light that sank into the cracks of the warship's armor. Explosions rippled across its side, small at first, then growing, fire spreading like veins of defiance. The warship roared, its engines shaking the stars. Hunters swarmed from its bays, but the human's ship darted through them like a blade through smoke. He rolled, fired, struck with precision, each shot opening wounds across the giant's body. The girl stared in awe, her fear slowly giving way to something stronger. He was one man, one human, and yet he fought an army without breaking. The warship turned, its cannons charging again, the glow brighter than ever. The girl's breath caught, but the human leaned forward, his voice calm. They think power makes them gods, but they forgot that even giants can fall. He dove, racing along the ship's spine, weaving through towers of steel and fire. With every strike, the warship shook, its lights flickering, its weapons failing. The hunters screamed in fury, surrounding them in a storm of fire. The human's craft spun, rolled, danced between them. He struck once, twice, each blast tearing holes into their ranks. But they were endless, more pouring from the warship's wounded belly. The girl's voice trembled. There are too many. The human's reply was steel. There are never too many when freedom is the prize. At last, he aimed the ship at the warship's heart, a glowing core pulsing at its center. His hands moved with precision, his voice low. This is where chains end. The girl's chest tightened, tears burning in her eyes as she whispered, then end them. The ship roared forward, past broken hunters, past fire and death. Explosions lit the void behind them as his final strike sank into the warship's core. Light consumed the stars, a blast that tore through the heavens. The warship split apart, its body breaking like glass under thunder. Hunters scattered, their engines failing, their courage gone. The girl shielded her eyes, her heart hammering as the small craft spun away from the explosion. For a moment, she thought it was the end, thought they would be lost in the fire. But the ship broke free, tumbling into the quiet of space, scarred but alive. Silence followed, the roar of war fading into nothing. The stars returned, steady and calm, as if the universe itself had taken a breath. The girl opened her eyes, her voice shaking. We survived. The human leaned back, his chest rising and falling, his face weary but unbroken. Yes, he said simply, you are free. She looked at him, truly looked, her eyes wide with something she had not felt in years. Hope. Her chains were gone, her masters defeated, her prison shattered. Tears ran down her cheeks, but for the first time they were not of pain. Why? She whispered again, the question still heavy in her heart. The human's gaze softened, his words slow and certain. Because no one deserves to be only a bed warmer. Because you deserve more. Silence filled the craft, but it was not empty, it was full. Full of promises, of futures unwritten, of stars waiting beyond the horizon. The girl wiped her tears, her voice small but steady. Then I will live, she said. I will not waste the freedom you gave me. The human nodded, his eyes turning to the stars. There is a whole universe out there, and you will see it. Behind them, the wreckage of the warship drifted like broken chains cast into the void. Ahead of them, endless stars stretched like roads of fire. The girl leaned against the seat, her heart no longer chained, her spirit no longer silent. For the first time, she was not a tool, not a slave, not a title forced upon her. She was herself again, alive, free, and carried forward by the courage of one human who refused to let darkness win.